CALED's podcast series shares information to help economic development professionals and communities of all sizes build resilient, sustainable economies through effective economic development policies and initiatives.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to CALED's podcast on building resiliency into your economic development strategy. My name is Gurbax Sahota, and I'm the president and CEO of CALED. And I'm joined today by Malinda Matson, who's the Northern California representative for the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Hi, Malinda, and welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here with you today.
Well, I'm glad you could make time, and I was hoping to start off with if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and why you think economic resiliency is a priority.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. So I've been with EDA for about 14 years, and it's become an ever-increasing priority at EDA to have communities build economic resiliency into their plans, and just to have more resilient communities. For me, it's because I have lived in very many places during my life and many different roles. I have seen firsthand how a non-resilient economy can impact its citizens, its businesses. Even as a young person, I moved thousands of miles away from my home because of a lack of opportunity, because of issues in the economy that were preventing individual growth, just cutting out opportunities. So I've seen it firsthand. I've worked with a number of communities over the years that have been resilient and non-resilient and in disaster recovery. So for me, it's more and more important that communities look at resilience for their businesses' sake, for their citizens' sake. It's just a very important issue for our communities to become aware of and handle.
Yeah. Agreed. And you answered this as you were talking, but is there anything you want to add why, for any communities that are listening, why they should be particularly paying attention to the issue of resiliency?
In my mind, in my experience, they need to look at resiliency in three buckets. So these are broad categories. The first one being, what is their economy? What are their major industry sectors? Are they dependent upon an industry sector more than others? Are they dependent on just one? Some of our communities are very dependent upon a seasonal industry like tourism. And that really, if everything's great, there's no problems. But, it's easy to disrupt an economy like that. And so your economy, your workforce, your ecosystems, these are the things that you need to be aware of. You really need to understand your economy, but it's not just your community's economy, it's the regional economy, because we all know that economies are not bounded by city limits or county borders or even state borders. Your community might have the primary employer for the region, or you might have, you might be a bedroom community. And so you need to look at all aspects of that regional economy, how you fit in, where it's weak, where it's strong, where's it vulnerable. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket I like to think of as our environment. So this could be infrastructure. It could be, is your infrastructure strong? Are you having issues with do you need a new wastewater treatment facility? Are you at capacity? Do you have enough water for your community? What about the electrical grid? These are things as part of infrastructure that are important for economic resilience. And then there's also the other part of the environment that's important, Where is your community located? What are the natural disaster risks that you could be facing? Where are your weaknesses when it comes to your environment? And then the third thing, and these are all external things. So it's a big bucket, and we've all seen examples of how this can really impact our local economy, our regional economy. So these are, this could be trade wars with other countries. It could be a natural disaster in another country that messes up our supply chains. It could be public policy that is affecting our industries. It could be competition from another state, another country. So those are the three buckets. And when we're thinking about resilience, it's like, what in those buckets are our vulnerabilities? What are the things that are going to cause us what are our limiting factors within those buckets? And one of the reasons it's important to identify these, be aware of them, and try to address them as you're working, through various stages of economic development. It's if you have what I like to call a major elephant in the room, some limiting factor that is really going to, it's hampering your economic growth now. Well, if you were to have a disruption, a natural disaster, that's not going to go away. It's going to be one of the biggest challenges on top of whatever the new problems you have. So be aware of your limiting factors, be aware of your strengths, look at the challenges in each of these buckets. And, there's no scale of 1 to 10 how resilient a community is or a regional economy is. But being aware of these things can give you an idea of how quickly you could recover from a disruption.
Yeah. I really appreciate those examples, Malinda, because I do think when people think of economic development and resiliency, the conversation's almost always about natural disaster, but you made excellent points about its economic development. It could be a disruption in your economy, not just a disaster that's impacting you. So thank you for adding that clarification in those examples. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk about strategies. I mean, EDA sets the gold standard with the comprehensive economic development strategy process, the CEDS process. Can you talk a little bit about how communities can use that to build resiliency into their economy?
Sure. And I do think it is the gold standard. And it's just really good planning that goes into it. And one of the core features of the CEDS, if you were to read the CEDS guidelines, which are available on our website, eda.gov, think of economic development as the intersection between the public sector, the private sector, and your citizens, the members of your community. And the way we look at economic development, strategy development, it's bringing all three of those together with the idea that you're going to have a shared vision of what your community is going to look like. And then it's going to lay out where you want to go and how you're going to get there. Strong, stable, resilient economies never happen accidentally. They're always come about from good, solid planning, good, solid strategy development from all of your stakeholders. So that is one of the core things behind the CEDS, is having the community buy-in. And as you're working through like the CEDS process that's outlined in the guidelines, you need to have strong statistics that are ground truthed, and then develop those measurable performance goals that, as you're implementing, as you're working through your process, you can go back and measure, well, how did we do? Did we actually hit our goals?
To add on to that, can you talk a little bit about what key actions a community can take to be more resilient? I mean, you've seen a lot of these strategies in your role with EDA. Are there any model practices or any specific actions that really stand out to you that you think communities should be engaging in to be more resilient?
So I think one of the key things that economic developers can do, communities can do, is collaborate and work together. So I think it's important for the economic developer of a community to work with the various other government agencies, to work with their chambers of commerce, to work with their business organizations, to work with workforce development, work with everybody that has a stake in the game. And then it's also important to work with other communities in the region so that you can be stronger together, because you're not competing with the community down the road. You're working with them for a stronger region.
Yeah.
One of the things that we see post-disaster that is always heartwarming and enlightening is how communities come together, how they put aside their differences and work together for a common goal. If you can capture that pre-disaster, I think you're going to be in a lot better position to become a more resilient community, because then you can tackle those problems together.
So, do you have recommendations on collaboration? Like, how, if you were giving advice to your community on how to engage in the process, what does that look like?
So, I think one of the things that could be done is actually pretty painless, and I know that I'm being very simplistic here, and that economies are really quite complex, and communities are quite complex, and there's a lot of various opinions and positions out there. But working together or working across silos is something that can help bring a better understanding about what's important to the economy. And I'd like to give a little bit of an example here.
Yeah.
So we've been working with FEMA on a process that we hope helps make communities a little more resilient. So we have actually aligned our SEDS guidelines with FEMA's disaster mitigation guidelines. And you can actually also find that on our website, how you can align those two plans. So initial thought, you're like, hold it, that's two different groups of people. That's your emergency response people, and that's your economic developers. Why would they ever work together? And the answer is really simple. When you're putting together your disaster mitigation plan, you're looking at what are the risks that your community is facing, that if you mitigate those risks, you would be stronger after a disaster, or if you were in a disaster. Well, those things could also be a risk to your local businesses, your local economy, your regional economy. So by working together on those plans, you are not only educating each other more about what your community, what your region is facing as far as risk to at least natural disaster, but you're also educating about the benefits that mitigating those risks is going to bring to your business community and to your economy.
Great example. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit, we always talk about this is what you should do. Can you talk about pitfalls of that communities should watch out for when they're working on economic resiliency, or their strategic plan as they're trying to address the issues?
So I think one of the biggest pitfalls is to not include as many stakeholders as you possibly can. Right now we're in the world of, we recognize that things have not always been equitable. They're still not equitable. And if you don't include those populations that you've left out in the past, you're going to continue leaving them out. So you need to be as inclusive as possible. Going back to that example of, intersection of business, government, and people, you have to make sure that you bring in all of the people, all of the businesses, and all of government to the process. And if you're leaving somebody out, you're running the risk of having an exposure to lack of resiliency. So one of the things our cities saw during the pandemic was that a lot of their downtown businesses that had not been an object of economic development, they had just been kind of taken for granted. It was always assumed there would be downtown businesses. There was some of them were mom and pop stores that had existed for generations, and the pandemic hit, and those were some of the hardest hit businesses in our communities. So I don't think anybody meant to leave them out pre-pandemic, but recognizing how important they were to our downtown and giving them, the extra love and attention that they needed so they could survive the pandemic became a big priority to a lot of our cities. So it's that kind of inclusivity as well, is making sure that you're really dealing with not just the big glitzy economic development goals, but also all aspects of your business community and your people, making sure that nobody's left behind.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. But as you're talking about outreach and all the work that goes into having a thoughtful strategy, making sure you are being inclusive, are you aware of resources to help communities with that?
So yeah, it's so there are certainly grant resources that you can get to help build strategies. You can certainly apply to EDA for money for development of ASEDs. Our economic development districts get, annual allotments to keep their SEDs up to date. I believe there's programs with many of the federal agencies, FEMA, DHS, Health, HUD, all of those that help you with the strategic plans. I would just really encourage you not to silo those plans and to really work across government agencies and constituencies to work on those plans. And then there's also a lot of resources out there. Statistics are a thing that scare a lot of people, but there are a lot of resources out there that are available for free from the Census Bureau, programs that we worked with at EDA, Stats America, and the new tool that we're coming out with, it's called Nerdy, I think. It's not quite sure where it is in development.
And that's a data tool to help with strategic planning?
Yeah, because it gives you, it looks at some indices on how resilient you are, what your innovation index looks like. One of the similar to like Stats America, which has been around a lot longer, and they pull from government data sources. But one of the very cool tools that I think that communities may not use enough is a feature on the Census Bureau American Community Survey called On the Map, where you can really look at like where's your concentration of businesses and jobs, and you can look at where are people coming into your community as commuters? Are they leaving your community and going out as commuters? Because it's very important to know, where people are going, how far they're going, and what direction they're going. And then once you see that, you can go, oh, we have a lot of people that are commuting, into Sacramento or into San Francisco, or maybe because of the changes in demographics because of the pandemic. I think that's another thing we need to really be cognizant of is what are our demographics now? Do we have a lot of teleworkers or Washington Post came out with this story yesterday that 17% of the population is over 65. That's a very interesting statistic. So there's a lot of things out there that are available for free, and they're pretty easy to use.
Well, there's one resource I'd like to add in as well, which is the Economic Development Resiliency and Recovery Playbook that EDA partnered with us on. Thank you for that support, Malinda. But that's a great resource in terms of talking about strategic planning, how to get through some of the key issues that you raise. And it also includes a lot of resources as well. And you can find that on our website. You'll also see it at the end of the podcast, but really grateful to EDA and to you in particular for your support of that project.
And it was my oversight to not mention it, but I do think it is a very valuable tool. And I share it with people all of the time, especially those that have been recently impacted by disaster. It really goes into some really great detail on a lot of the things that we've talked about today, which were really just touching the surface, and gets us to think more about what are the more in-depth things that we need to learn and know about our communities.
Thank you. And thanks again for the support, because it wouldn't have happened without it. So we appreciate it. And we're glad to have this resource because as we think about economic development, resiliency, and recovery, one of the conversations that comes up is there ever a finish line when you're working on resiliency? Is it a continuous process? And what are your thoughts on that?
So in my mind, I think it is a goal and it's not a destination. And I think we're tricking ourselves if we think we're going to get there, because there's always going to be something that it makes us vulnerable. Our economies are too intrinsically linked across the world. With climate change, we're seeing challenges that we had never thought of before, or it wasn't in our imagination that we would be facing it. And there's also natural disasters that are real that have nothing to do with climate change. And I'm sorry if I'm wrong about this, but I would think that earthquakes are not connected to climate change, but they're a constant threat here in California. And so it is something we constantly have to be looking at. How can we, strengthen our industry sectors? How can we diversify our sectors so that we are less vulnerable to, dependence upon one sector? What can we do to provide more opportunity to our citizens? And just like me, when I was young and I said, there's no opportunity here, I'm leaving. What can we do to keep our young people from leaving and going elsewhere for their dreams?
Yeah, excellent point. Well, this is great information and advice for communities and anybody that is working on economic development, resiliency. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with those that are watching the podcast?
I think that you cannot collaborate too much. You cannot communicate too often with your stakeholders. As economic developers, sometimes I tease that, we're all just busybodies because it's kind of our job to know what's going on. and what's happening and what's potential. And I think that's a crucial thing for resiliency, kind of understanding where your businesses are at, understanding where public policy is at, watching the weather, making sure that, we just know what's going on. And not to be paranoid. I don't think that's ever a good idea, but certainly being aware, being informed, and having that great understanding of what it is that makes our economies tick, and maybe what is it that we need to work on to make them stronger. And, we need to deal with those elephants in the room, and we need to get, as many of our stakeholders to understand why we need to deal with those elephants that are keeping us from being prosperous and successful.
Thank you. And thanks for the words of wisdom and your time today. Again, great information. You can learn more at our playbook. And, thanks for everything you do to support economic development in California.